There's a lot of chatter about this issue. There's a lot of chatter about whether or not we're going to even see a recognition of the quote-unquote state of Palestine by Secretary Kerry before January 20th. What are the key issues we need to be watching out for? We know that this is a significant change in U.S. Diplomatic policy. We know that it is something that is lighting a fire both under Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli people and under a lot of people in the United States too. But where does it go from here is the question. I mean, how can this bridge now ever be built back up between these two nations? Is this not now irreconcilable?
Well, it's not irreconcilable in the sense that, of course, a new administration with very new ideas can sweep in and change the tone completely. That said, you're right to highlight the danger. The problem is that once you start passing things in a UN context at the Security Council, once resolutions are passed, it is very difficult to rescind them because you will require essentially no party to veto the rescinding motion, if you like. So the trouble is that until Jan the 20th, you have a U.S. administration that seemingly set itself against everything U.S. policy has stood for in the last 40 years and is pushing through something in its lame duck period, which you would not expect any U.S. administration to ever do, much less so in this period to tie the hands of its successors.
Why? Why did they do this at this time?
Well, it seems to me that they probably wanted to do this a long time before, but feared that it would hurt Hillary Clinton's election chances. After all, if the administration she had served in would have done something like this, it clearly would have reflected badly on her and on what most people in America would regard as the U.S. strategic priorities, which are not to harm the state of Israel. And of course, you look at this now, this has to be what Obama is seeing as his swan song. This is his real chance to make a statement to the world about what he truly believes in. And I dare say he's thinking of what's going to happen post Jan 20th for himself. I guess he wants to set himself up like a Jimmy Carter style figure going around bringing peace to the world. And in his view, this will, of course, incur the sort of, damaging the state of Israel as part of it.
You know, you and I disagree on certain things, and that's not that it won't surprise you to hear that. We're talking to Dr. Alan Mendoza from the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, and so I want to raise one of those issues. See, I know, and you correct me if I'm wrong. I know you are a big fan of international institutions. I am not. I would rather take a sledgehammer to them. I would rather demolish that building in Manhattan and turn it into a Trump hotel. Quite frankly, there was a bill that went to the U.S. Congress in 2015. It was called the American Sovereignty Restoration Act of 2015. It was authored by Congressman Mike Rogers. This is basically what I called a minute ago to one of our callers a U-Sexit bill, a U.S. exit of the United Nations. Do you think that is a realistic prospect under a Donald Trump presidency?
Well, look, I think it's possible. Let me start by saying we may disagree on some things. I don't think either of us agree that the UN is a great institution. I don't think you're going to find anyone who's going to defend that. And I think actually the need for reform at the UN is paramount. I don't think we're going to get it. So there has to be some reaction, I think, among the great democracies of the world to say enough of being dictated to by large numbers of non-democracies. Now, what that means, I don't know. Now, whether it is an exit as such is one question. It's certainly possible the Trump administration may feel this will go down that route, but of course it will incur international risks in doing so. The point of the UN system, why everyone always says if it didn't exist, you'd need to invent it, is it remains, however imperfect it is, the only forum where you can get all the countries in the world sitting around, basically, and at least talking about problems. Now, you may say that's not worth something. But when you consider what happened in the last time the US wasn't part of a body like this, which is, of course, in the interwar period before the Second World War, it didn't end up so well, if I recall.
Yeah, it didn't end up so well, but I would question, the United Nations started off as an organization which was to effectively assist in keeping the peace, in assisting with discussions, in assisting with diplomacy, in making sure that there wasn't the first port of call wasn't war. We've lost Dr. Alan Mendoza there just briefly. We're going to try and get him back on the line. And I will continue with that thought and I'll put it to him once he gets back on. The United Nations now, perhaps, when it includes things like Saudi Arabia, when it includes things like Iran, when it includes countries like Venezuela, failed states, places where you can't even buy toilet paper in the world, are dictating to the United States, to the United Kingdom, to the major powers what the political priorities should be. Dr. Alan Mendoza, I believe we have you back there. I don't know if you called that just now. I'm saying...
I did. I called the beginning of the end, so I'm assuming I know what the middle was as well.
Well, exactly. When you know full well that you have the Saudi Arabias chairing the Human Rights Councils, and you have places in the world where you can't buy toilet paper, telling us what our political, trajectories should be, then how on earth does this institution have any credibility?
No, it doesn't. The point is, the question isn't credibility. I don't believe the UN today has any credibility because democracies are heavily outnumbered by non-democracies. And its purpose, I question what you said at the start about its purpose. Maybe originally when it was conceived, the idea was for it to keep the peace and do things like that. But it was pretty obvious early on, once you had the blocks, the Soviet Union and the US blocks shaping up around the world, this was never going to be what on paper it might once have been. So the history of the UN has always been never keeping the peace in a real sense. The only purpose it has is to get people around a table talking. That's it. Now, that's not much of a purpose, I agree with you, but it's better than the alternative, which is no forum where people can actually get round and talk. And that's where its legitimacy, if any, stems from, just being a forum where everyone's included. Now, you wouldn't get that anywhere else. And I agree with you, we shouldn't be dictated by it. There should be moves by the democracies in the world to actually have a democratic caucus or to have some alternative body where the democratic and free states of the world can indeed dictate terms to the rest of the world, not the other way around.
The banana republic, phrase, I think is a little bit trite and outdated now. I want to come up with something new for Venezuela. I mean, don't get me wrong, I feel entirely sorry for the Venezuelan people.
Well, Venezuela's a failed state.
It's a completely failed state, but it's the toilet paper thing that I can't get my head around. This is a country whereby you're wheeling truckloads of cash into the supermarket and you can't even buy an apple. And this country wants to tell us what our priorities are about. It's not a banana republic, it's a dirty bum republic as far as I'm concerned. The final question I have for you, Dr. Alan Mendoza, is where is the United Kingdom on this, and why is the United Kingdom where it is on this issue? And that is to say, again, stabbing Israel in the front.
Let me answer that in a second, but let me just talk about Venezuela for one second. I agree with you entirely. It's a failed state. Your terminology is not incorrect given the toilet paper situation. But I will say this. The fact that there is still a credible opposition in Venezuela that is fighting for its rights should give us some hope, at least, that even in a state as bad as that, there is always something around the corner to be optimistic about. And hopefully that opposition will indeed be able to complete its takeover in a democratic way down the line. But back to the UK for a second. Look, the UK has had a position for years, which has been broadly kind of friendly to Israel, but not that friendly. And the point it's always made has been an obsession, and I use that word carefully, an obsession with settlements as being the worst thing that's ever happened to the Middle East. You look at the Middle East today, Raheem, are settlements the worst thing that's happened to the Middle East? Are they? Of course not. No. I think we could point to the inter-19 strife in the Muslim world. We can look at the chaos in Syria. We can see what's happening in Iran. All these places, we can easily see how much worse. And yet, the British government chooses this issue to hang its hat on. I think, unfortunately, there's a misreading of the situation, which has been provoked by a long-term Arabist bent within our Foreign Office and also, I'm afraid, within the US State Department as well. They've seized their opportunity and they've gone forward with it. And the irony is, this move makes it much harder to achieve the solution that the British government says and the US government says it would like to see, which is a two-state solution. Because how will you get towards a two-state solution when only one party is being attacked? Only one party is being told it must do things. Last time I looked, it wasn't Israelis who failed to sign peace agreements. It was the Palestinians. Surely, if we were serious about getting peace, we'd be applying pressure to the Palestinians and not the Israelis.
I have a feeling that this may, for want of a better term, radicalize a lot of people. I can safely say for myself that having been a long-standing advocate, or at least somebody who has passively been approving of a two-state solution, I no longer believe that that is possible, and I no longer believe that it is something that we should aspire to. I think I'm now a one-state believer. Greater Israel for me. Take over the West Bank, take over Gaza. The Arab people who call themselves Palestinians can go to Jordan, can go to Egypt. What about that?
Well, look, the problem with growth for Israel is the democratic side of the equation. You say they can go to Jordan or they can go to Egypt. Well, the truth is, if Israel is to annex the West Bank, if it is to annex those areas, it will need to give democratic rights to the people who live there, or else it will no longer be a democracy. That's a simple equation. If it's willing to do that, then I think the rest of the world will have little issue but to accept the annexation. If it will not give, democratic rights to people who live there and insist they leave, that's going to cause further problems. And that's why that solution has always been resisted by most people, both in Israel and beyond, because they realize the choice, in a sense, is between a Jewish state or a democratic state. And therein lies the problem.
Where does the British government go from here? And we're talking to Dr. Alan Mendoza, the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. Where does the British government go from here? The Foreign and Commonwealth Office has always been Arabist in its outlook. One might even say anti-Israel in its outlook. Theresa May hasn't exactly made a lot of friends with her stances on migration, on Brexit, on Sharia law, on the Snoopers Charter. She's now making more enemies. I know she's got a grace period because you've got this communist in charge of the Labour Party over there, and therefore it's not much opposition, but that will not last. That she finds herself in a very lucky circumstance right now. Can she really afford to be making more enemies?
Well, I think we have to unpick what's happened here. I find it very hard to believe that Theresa May was told the full story about what was going on here in terms of the backroom dealing. It seems to me a classic Foreign Office ploy here to present something to the Prime Minister as being reasonable and normal, explaining the issues. And let's not forget, the Prime Minister hasn't had a great, a long background in foreign policy. She's been a Home Affairs Prime Minister, or rather politician. The Foreign Office comes to you, they appear wise and worldly, they present something at the last minute saying, Prime Minister, the Americans in favor. I wonder if they presented the full options. I wonder if they presented the fact the Trump administration was going to be against something like this, and instead suggested this was pro-US policy, because it seems to me a bit of an own goal. Here we are in Britain, apparently, and I don't quite know exactly what happened there, but apparently helping the Obama administration ring people up, get support for a motion in the sense that they didn't even want to support themselves but just abstain on, but we were pushing for it, doing a favor to an administration that's leaving in 2 weeks' time. And let's not forget, this was an administration that told us we'd be back of the queue for Brexit, free trade talks, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Why are we doing a favor? The Obama administration, this lays on. They can do nothing for us in return.
Well, the analogy of an abusive lover comes to mind.
Well, possibly, but I don't understand why this happened, except for the Foreign Office probably twisting things and putting it before the Prime Minister. My suggestion would be that the Prime Minister needs to take a grip on the Foreign Office, much like Mrs. Thatcher once did. As she famously said, the Foreign Office's job is to manage Britain's decline. Well, sadly, here's just another example of it, this motion. Snuck through at the last minute, no debate on it really, no domestic debate, nothing of this kind, put forward, and not considering the consequences. I think it won't help our relations with the Trump administration that we've been so cozy with Obama on something Trump opposes, and that doesn't bode well for Britain long term.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, the founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you so much for joining us here on Breitbart News Daily. Make sure you check out the Henry Jackson Society's work at henryjacksonsociety.org. And